All right. Hi, everyone. I am Renee Ryan. This is my off the shelf segment broadcasting from Step Into the Story. And we have a really exciting broadcast today because my good friend Rebecca Rosenberg has agreed to come and talk with us. And the great thing about Rebecca is that her book is also set in the Champagne region in France during a war. The difference is that her war is a little different. So the best thing about the reason that I came across Rebecca was that Champagne Widows, this is her book. Isn't it a gorgeous cover? I've always loved this artwork. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But we discovered that in my book is, ta-da, The Widows of Champagne. And so when we came across how similar our titles were, both of us were like, okay, we have to connect. We have to talk about this. We have to meet each other. We are meant to be friends. We are meant to discuss books. So I am so excited to welcome Rebecca here because we are now going to just dig into champagne and widows and research and books. And thank you so much for being here. I've had the pleasure of reading your book. It is fantastic. We're going to talk about how to buy it soon, but it kept me riveted. I read it very quickly. I am so excited that our paths crossed and I actually have discovered a brand new favorite author, much less have a new friend. So Rebecca, why don't you do us a little favor and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, thank you, Renee. It's been so much fun to connect in that way. And the first shock of seeing our two books, like, oh my goodness, they're so similar. But I actually, with my first book, I had that same situation where the books were similar and I loved meeting the author and we did a number of things together. And that was a book about Houdini. And she had done a book about Houdini too. And it was two different viewpoints, and I think it's really interesting. So I live in wine country, California, and we have a lavender farm here in the middle of wine country. And my first book that I wrote was all about lavender because I know about that. And then a few books later, I said, well, I ought to do a book about my favorite thing, which is champagne. And so that's how I started on Champagne Widows. Plus, I've been to Champagne, France many times, and I found out about my widow, who is Veuve Clicquot, and maybe you've seen this bottle of champagne. Mm-hmm. So this is, we'll get into the book, but this is the first woman of Champagne. And in 1800s, when women were not allowed to own businesses or property, she prevailed and did this amazing champagne. And it has become one of the world's biggest champagne houses. So I really wanted to honor her and tell her story.
Oh, Veuve Clicquot is my favorite wine. I love it, or I should say champagne.
Yeah.
And it's my favorite. So I'm so excited. That was one of the things I was really excited about was when I was doing my research, I knew my book was going to be a World War II, and I started researching the Champagne region. And that's how I came across just the general, she was the first, but many widows in the history since her, because of all the wars that have come across the Champagne region, it seems to be sort of almost like the little area that all these different armies just march across, and every war somewhere along the way, Champagne is in Europe. Champagne has been in the middle of it all. And it was interesting in my research, and I found out that so many of these women were left as widows, and then they continued to run their businesses or their husband's businesses, or in some cases their family's businesses. They were partnerships. And that was kind of where my idea came from. Mine are obviously all very, very, let's see, I'm going to say, well, all of mine are fictional, but they were based on all of the real widows, and if you look at my dedication, I dedicated to all the major widows that started and ran their champagne houses.
Yeah.
And hi, Carla. I see Carla's here. Hi, Carla. Welcome. So glad to see you. So anyway, let's kind of dig in a little bit too. So now we've kind of covered how Rebecca and I came into each other's lives, how we ran across each other. We both have a love of champagne. We both have had, yay, have a sip. And we both have this love for research, which is how we ended up coming across our Champagne Widow. And and she is truly the matriarch of the Champagne Widows, is Veuve Clicquot. And so, but I always like to start when we're talking about the books. I love to start from the outside in. So tell me a little bit about how you landed on this cover. I have seen this particular artwork before, and I just found it when I saw that. I went, how did she score that? So please tell me how this came about.
Well, this is a painting that was done in 1915 by Lou Mayer, and it was actually a magazine advertisement or illustration for champagne. And when I was looking for a great cover, I actually had another one, and I have several girlfriends who are really into champagne. So I had them judging my various covers. And my one girlfriend who owns a sparkling wine winery here said, I don't think you're quite getting the whole feeling of your book with this other cover. And she said, you ought to use my label. Did you know that, Renee?
No, I did not know that.
So this is called Breathless Wine, and it's sparkling wine. And it's one of the largest sparkling wine houses here in wine country, because they actually private label sparkling wine for all the wineries. So they make like 300 wineries different champagne, and they make their own. So we'll talk about the difference between champagne and sparkling wine. But she said, this is the woman that you're really portraying. And she also looks like a very modern, exciting woman, even though she's from 1915. And I said, but you don't want to let me use that artwork from your label? And she said, yes, it's fine. I could do it. So I love it, because in the winery, they sell these together. And it's just a lot of fun. And it is that exuberant feeling that I wanted out of the book. Somebody who really accomplished something in her life that was impossible, truly impossible to accomplish at the time.
Yes. So let's talk a little bit about, that was so fascinating, is, I have always really admired her. This particular widow, the matriarch, the trailblazer, the groundbreaker. There's so many words that so many lovely labels. Let's stay within our metaphors. Lovely labels that we could attach to her. So why don't you tell me a little bit about why her, I know that you had come across her in your research, and I have so many questions about your research. Because when I did just like a Google search and I tried to do a little bit of searching into her, there was so much in your book that I did not come across. Now, of course, I did like a 5-minute Google search. So where did you get all your information?
Oh, okay. So are you saying that you found other things other than?
No. I'm saying that it was very scarce what I found. There wasn't tons of information.
Yeah, she has more information than my other widows. By the way, this is the first of a trilogy of 3 widows.
Oh.
Yeah. And
who's your next one?
The next one, I happen to have her champagne here, Pommery.
Oh, right.
So Renee, you'll have to go to Pommery, because it is an art gallery underground. It is so amazing. And she's an entirely different story than Veuve Clicquot. Back to Veuve Clicquot. So I've been to Champagne many times, and I've been to the Veuve Clicquot winery, which I want to show you. I have a picture of that. For those that have read the book, this is the cavern. This is a picture that I took from the caverns of Veuve Clicquot. And you can just see how magical it is down there with all their bottles and everything. So when I decided that I wanted to write a book about her, I asked if I could meet with their company historian. And I hired her to walk with my husband and I all of her runs and find out where she grew up. I mean, you can still see the houses that her husband lived, that she lived. You can see the wineries. You can go out to the country in Boozy and see all the the cottages there. So I really got into it for a day with her. And then she allowed me to ask her questions and, you know, along the way. And she gave me like their books that aren't even for sale, that are their historical books. And I'm doing that right now with Pomeroy. And that's the way to go, because this is one reason that we probably write history about women, Renee, is that there's not a lot of history kept about women, you know, and it's not talked about a lot. So I really like to dig and find out, you know, who they were. So I heard that she was an example of that. As I heard during that discussion that Barbara Nicole Clicquot had Lene, which is about the nose. And what did that mean? That she had a super sensitive nose, and it allowed her to discern the different flavors in the grapes so she could make an extraordinary champagne. So that was mentioned like really in passing, but I used that as like a whole impetus for her character and who she was going to be. You know, and that made her very picky and particular and made her kind of funny, didn't you think? She was kind of
I love that about her. I loved how as an author, that was sort of the imagery that you used. You used some amazing imagery. And I know that and I used to work for Chanel Cosmetics. And,
oh my goodness.
And one of the things, and so this is what you know, the two things that I think of in France is fragrances, perfumes, and then their wine. And in the perfume industry, they call them the nose, you know, so the nose is huge. And so I really enjoyed kind of digging into that. And I thought that was a brilliant sort of tact on your part, was basically choosing to give her that imagery. And I wanted to, you know, sort of, I'm glad you landed there on that on that part of it, because I know women in general tend to have very strong olfactory senses, and especially during certain times of the month, we can smell more. And I would think that it would be how she thought of it as almost a curse, because it's one thing when you're smelling beautiful things and she's using it to create wine, and she's using it to create champagne, and she's using it to choose the grapes and the blends and things like that. I mean, what a blessing. But when, you know, certain people came in, she could smell everything about them. She could even, I loved how you even had her smelling their emotions. And I thought that was, you know, so kudos to you. I think that was a really smart decision as an author. I loved it. I loved that you took that.
Oh, thank you. Direction. I think it's fun to pick a trait that is unusual, but true. And if you think about a little girl who doesn't like to smell, you know, spinach or whatever, and how she might be seen as very particular and picky and persnickety. And I wanted to make her more fun than just a straight character.
And willful. You also, and very willful.
You created this cool thing that I got to help me understand being a Lene. And that these are the scents. Can you see that?
Yeah, lift them up a little higher. Yeah, perfect. Oh, I love that. Okay. Yes,
these are actually the scents of champagne. Isn't that cool?
Yeah, I see the apple and the pear and the pineapple and the vanilla.
So
I love that.
This is what her grandmother was trying to teach her before she passed away, is that she had this ability to smell all these things. And it's really fun.
Well, and smell is so connected to taste. And so I think that, isn't that the whole point of when we're tasting wine, we smell first, then we taste, and it creates, you know, and it enhances both. So I thought that was brilliant. Well done.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you.
And so then you also kind of made her a feminist. So let's talk a little bit about that. Because this was a time Also another thing, I loved how Napoleon showed up so much in this book as well, because this is during the Napoleonic Wars. And you can't tell, as I was reading this book, I thought, you can't tell this story without having Napoleon in it. And I felt like you did a nice job of painting him as he was, not as a romantic figure by any means. But then even the conversation that she has with him. Now, was that true conversations, or was that creative license on your part?
Excuse me.
You've been smelling too much. You got it.
Well, of course, they're made up conversations because it was from 1800 and nobody knew, what they would say to each other. But what is true, and this is what we do, right, Renee? It's like there is a grain of truth in it. And the truth is that Napoleon made Barbara Nicole's father the mayor of Reims. And he loved champagne. Napoleon saw champagne as a weapon against Europe because Europe loved champagne. And so he could close down the borders and not give them the champagne they wanted as a bargaining tool. So they had conversations. They met at certain times. And I never knew Napoleon was going to be in this book. But as you get into the history, you realize that he is influencing everything that's happening in France right as she's trying to make champagne. And he's really the antagonist in the whole process because he's making it impossible for her to make and sell champagne. And this is a true fact. She does break all his laws to ship her champagne to Russia. And the fun thing about that is he's trying to conquer Russia, and he's in Moscow. He's marching his army of 500,000 men across Russia. And what does he see there? But Veuve Clicquot. Now, did that happen? It could have happened because they were marketing the Veuve Clicquot in Moscow. And he could have very well seen it, and he would have known that it was against the law. So I did make up the conversations, but it absolutely could have happened. I love that.
Yeah, I love filling in the blanks. That's what's so much fun about being a historical fiction author is that, there's, and especially you touched on this back at the beginning of our conversation where you said there's just not a lot of recorded history of women. And how difficult it can be and is to basically go back and try and find this history because men have owned the narrative for so long, especially back then. Men owned the narrative. I mean, they even made laws so that women couldn't inherit and women were considered as much a property. And when they brought their dowry, that money and property became their husbands as soon as the marriage license was signed. Yes, it's horrible. Horrible.
Well, you were asking about being a feminist. Would you say that some of your widows were feminists?
I would say they would not have called themselves that. I think that they would have considered themselves survivors. I would say that they would consider themselves, you do what you have to do to create, your goals and dreams. And I think for my oldest heroine, Josephine, she was honoring her husband's legacy more than she was breaking free of his legacy. I think that Hélène was living the life that she had been raised to live. She was from I thought about, Veuve Clicquot's sister, Clementine, probably very much kind of like raised like Hélène. Yes. And then you have Gabrielle, who would be the younger one, living at a time where I would say, knowing she's going to take over the family business and prepared to do so. So I would say of them all, she's definitely the trailblazer. And she did have these women, these strong women guiding her. So that was kind of how I wrote it. And I think that was sort of how I saw them. I didn't see them as making political statements. I didn't see them as standing for anything other than family first and each other and future generations and family, as opposed to Yeah, as opposed to standing for the women of, the women of France. And
when I researched that aspect, there is this Olympia Gauguin that Barbara Nicole quotes from. Mm-hmm. And that was the original feminist. And so I didn't want to just have her understand. She was a reader and she was intelligent, and I wanted to have her read, these sentiments, even though nobody would call themselves a feminist because they were not even allowed to own property. They were chattel. They were nobody. In fact, there's a term called coverture that existed back then. And that was where the husband's identity covers the woman's entirely, and they have no rights at all. So I just wanted to inflict that a little bit. Like that was the beginning of feminism, and it was happening in the 1800s. And it took a really
absolutely. And your heroine truly was a trailblazer in that. Even her finding the loopholes in the law so that her father-in-law didn't shut down the business, and she was able to continue moving forward. And I like how you foreshadowed in one of the scenes where, was it, let me think about it. Was it her mother that said, you better get it in writing that you're going to be able to have if something happens to your husband? And she sort of brushed it off. And I thought that was a nice way of doing it, where the mother, who had seemed somewhat like my Hélène, had seemed so a woman of her times, was also still forward thinking when it came to thinking about her daughter and her daughter's future. And I found like those two characters, your character, Barbie Nicole's mother, and then my Hélène, my Gabrielle's mother, I feel would have been friends had they met, and if mine was real and had lived at the same time.
And they had similar relationships with their daughters that weren't really friendly, but the daughters, what I wanted to do, and I think you did it too. I didn't think about this till just now, but you did it too, where the daughter realizes later in life that her mother's been trying to do the right thing. And I kind of like that, because aren't you? I think we're all like that, where we look back and say, wow, my mother was really, I'm going to get verklempt here. My mother was looking out for me, and I didn't realize it. And I didn't give her the break and the respect that I should have. So we both did that. That's cool.
Right. Because I think that, and I think in my book too, the way that I did it was how that sacrifice at the end, and that last conversation, and the mother says to her, you are my biggest accomplishment. Basically, you are the pride of my life. And I felt like, so many times, and actually when people ask me which character am I the most like, I would say I'm most like her, the mother, because I am definitely a creature of my culture, the time period. I grew up in the South. I was a debutante, a sorority girl. And this is back in the 70s, 80s, when everyone, feminism supposedly had this big surge. And yet in pockets of this country, and I think even still, there were still the old school. And my mother was very much a woman of her time. And so I feel as though to write women like that, and then still give them that understanding of, well, I'm not going to be able to break free from this, but I can make sure my daughter does. And I liked how we both ended up capturing that. And I feel like that's the thing about historical fiction, women's fiction, I call it historical women's fiction, is the difference between our books and, say, a historical fiction straight one, say like The Alchemist or a book like that, is that we are able to explore different kinds of women and yet show the relationships. And I think that women are we're so community oriented, and yet women have the most complicated relationships. And I can always tell when a man writes female relationships, because they're very surface. And so I do love reading books that dig deeper. And I love that relationship between those two and how deep you went into that. And that's basically that was one of my goals as well. And we have to talk about two other characters I really want to capture conversation with you, Rebecca, was, the husband, Francois. And I had read too that he had some mental illness. So was that also something that you did some research on? Because was he manic depressive? What was it that I know he had PTSD? I mean, that was very obvious.
So
before that,
he did have weaknesses in his mental strength. And you know that because his father wrote him letters all the time that said, watch out for this, you know, not do too much of that, and really watch out for your health. So the father always was watching out for him. And then he went to war, and he really had a hard time because not to get into too much of the war, but the problem was that the revolutionaries really believed they were right, but then they have to kill people that could be their countrymen or boys that were their age, and it was just really terrible. So it really hurt him, and he wasn't able to withstand the pressures that were ongoing with the war. So back to Napoleon, he had 13 years of war. He killed 5 million people in France alone. And that's what left all these widows. And I love that you, like in your book, Renee, you really took a lot of the things that have happened to the widows, all of the widows over probably 30 years. And you used a lot of that in this book, and it was really great. So now it's going to be a challenge for me to do it differently than you in my next book. It's a good challenge.
I think that, in my book, and this is so funny how the similarities where you had the arch enemy Napoleon, and obviously I had the arch enemy Hitler. And
yes,
in many ways they were very similar. And even the Red Man, we'll talk about him in a minute. But even how I feel as though you had Napoleon, and then here we are 130 years later, Hitler's rise, and how similar these two were in terms of using champagne, the region, the wine, leveraging that as a weapon, stealing it, crippling the people, the French people. I think the Napoleonic War, which people don't call it this, but I looked at it as even a civil war. I mean, it was as much a civil war as it was a European war. He fought within his, and I think that was what made it such a hard war. And I loved how you took, you took Francois, and you had him get his PTSD because he ended up having to fight against, kill his neighbor, so to speak. And that was something that they did during the World War II, but in World War II, during Nazi occupation, there was no right or wrong, it was survival. So when somebody became a Vichy collaborator, or, a collaborator versus a resistance worker or versus someone in between, it was all about personal survival. In the Napoleonic time period and those wars, there was this, I'm trying to think of the word here. There was this belief, rhetoric, but rhetoric isn't strong enough, but there was this true sort of understanding that there was a very strong, if you were a royalist, you were wrong and you were evil. And if you were a revolutionary, you were right and you were good. And I mean, what a difficult time. And I loved how you have Nicole Barbie, her father, he blew with the wind.
Yeah.
Whoever was in power was where he was.
Did you like that, Renee, how her father is straddling both sides? And did you
I love that because you know what? I covered that too in my book, because I think that is the reality of a lot of people. I think when we retell history, like even our American Revolution against England, and you talk about the Civil War, and the South was evil because there were slaves, and the North was good because there weren't, they were fighting slavery. And I find that what happened really is that it's, as we're so removed from it, how easy it would be to be a revolutionary, how easy it would be to be on the American side, how easy it would have been to be on one or the other side. But really, that's not how it was. It's gray when you're in the middle of the war. And so telling that story and having that character play that role was very smart on your part.
That's sweet. Thank you. I loved doing it, but guess what? That was true. Because Barbara Nicole's father was a royalist. He had even helped with the coronation of their last king. And then he became a staunch, he completely changed his colors and became a staunch revolutionary, and was even leading the revolutionaries. And meanwhile, as soon as Napoleon was gone, he became a royalist again. So he was very political. And what he was doing was protecting Ron's and all of his town people. And he was a wealthy man. He had a 1,000-person wool factory. So he was protecting his people. And I like that. So I loved having her discovering that. And at first she doesn't like that. Like, what are you doing? Like, what side are you on? But then she understood that he was protecting the people. So it was interesting.
Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
I want to ask you, one thing I loved about The Widows of Champagne is that you had each of your characters do what they would never do. You had them, their arcs are like, each one of them ended up doing something that they would never do in a million years. Like the young daughter, she actually betrays her mother and ruins everything. And the mother, I don't want to give away, what she does, but she does.
She collaborates on a level. Yeah.
she collaborates with the enemy, and she protect her family. So I thought that was fantastic, and really how you did that. So did you figure those things out from the beginning, or did they come to you as you were creating the book?
Well, we had talked before we came on live about my somewhat prolific career, not that much, but somewhat prolific career. And I cut my teeth in romance, and I really studied the craft of writing. And one thing that I found that I felt my hands were tied in romance was they tell us what's the worst thing that can happen to a character. And you figure it out, and then you say, we'll make that happen. But in a romance, that you can't really do that, because if you make that happen, then this character becomes so incredibly unlikable. And so as I was writing all those books and I was trying to decide, and I kept kind of skirting the line. I think some of mine, at one of my Once an Heiress, I had the heroine sell a family heirloom. And that was something that you don't want her to do. And she would never have done that. And she's all the time thinking she's going to get it back, and she never does. So that was so I kept sort of flirting with that line. And when I got to this book, my goal was not that they would all do it, but my goal was kind of, okay, ask yourself, as you're creating these characters, what's the worst thing that can happen, and make it happen. And that was sort of how I went forward with that. I think that for the matriarch, for Josephine, the worst thing that could happen would be to lose her mind, and she, and to lose control. And well, what do? You give her dementia, and you give her, there's no cures for these things. There's no cure for what Paulette did. There's no cure for what Hélène does. She has to leave the country and never come back. And so I thought, I wanted to write a book that deals with, this is war. This is the truth of war. This is the truth of, it's so easy for us to look back on the French during World War II, especially as Americans. I was always raised with this, I feel like it was a false narrative that the French all like they were bad because they were weak. And that is such an inaccurate understanding of who the French were during World War II. And not just the few resistance workers. And so I came into that story going, you know what? I am going to blow the lid off of this, and I'm going to show what it really means to live in a war zone. and what that, and not knowing when or if it will ever. We did not know who was going to win that war. The French certainly didn't know at the time. It was pretty clear that everyone in this world was going to be speaking German before it was all over. And, you know, especially at the beginning of this book. And I wanted to go in not knowing how it ended in that respect. So that long answer to a very short question.
Well, I love that. You did a really great job of that.
Well, good. All right. So let me ask you about Jean-Baptiste. I want to ask you about him.
Okay.
So was he
no.
Go ahead. Keep going.
Well, he was actually Barbara Nicole's brother, but he was not necessarily gay. But he never had any children. So there's that thing where you're trying to tell some stories in a fiction book. So there were gay men. That was the time of Oscar Wilde. And so there were a lot of gay men. The point I wanted to make is, what did that look like to be gay back then? And it was against the law, and you could be killed and all of that. So I did just make a decision to portray him as gay, even though it wasn't obvious. But he did marry an older woman who had children, and they did not live together. So there were some hints that possibly that could be. But I just wanted to show what that was about, to be gay during the 1800s, because we don't think of that today.
I love that. And actually, in some countries, it was illegal to be gay all the way in the 1950s. I mean, this is not something, you know, and punishable by incarceration or death. So I liked how you went there. I think that that's, again, a creative choice that you made that I thought was very brave, and also interesting that you did that. And I know that, you know, they did wear the powder and the makeup. And so a man who had tendencies and wanted to be flamboyant could be safely flamboyant, if you will, in this time period, and somewhat embrace without embracing who he really was. And then I started, you know, he really was a very, to me, a tragic character, because to have those tendencies and to have that, you know, to wake up and know this is who he is and not be able to embrace that part of his nature, I felt very sad for him. And I liked how you had the sister, or actually, you know, your main heroine, really embrace him regardless, you know. So I thought that was a nice little, I liked him, and I liked that theme, and I thought you did that really well. I liked that. So that was a nice little, you know, I have my heroine's brother. I want to ask about him. So tell me go ahead.
I was just going to say, what we both tried to do, I'm sure, is try to research what else is happening in life around a story that might be interesting to know. Like, you didn't touch on the fact that Barbara Nicole's mother is wearing arsenic-dyed clothing, and it has disastrous effects on her. And that was true. Yes. They were all wearing arsenic green clothing, and it was terrible, but they didn't give it up. And they were wearing makeup. She was wearing a white face makeup, which was very popular, and it actually was lead powder, and it eats away your skin. So I love to find out those little things along the way. Like, you were starting to ask about the red man. What did you want to ask about the red man?
I wanted to ask about, I liked how I'm trying not to give spoilers, but I liked how you said that his next, you know, like there was talk about him. I mean, to me, I felt as though you really tapped into almost a little bit of, you know, Dante. And I'm trying to figure out how to say it that way, you know, and very much of a demon type character, certainly demonic and evil, and that he was an advisor to Napoleon. What did you find out in your research? Like, because I felt that you portrayed him he was a very scary character. I thought that was an interesting portrayal.
So the wild thing about the Red Man, who in the book is the advisor to Napoleon, is that he was real. And that if you Google him, you can find out eyewitness accounts about him. You can see in Napoleon's diary about him. And so he had this evil advisor who he would consult and who really pushed him to rule the world. That's what he was trying to do. And so and there's very little about him, but there's enough to create a character. And he is like the devil personified, in my opinion.
Kind of a Rasputin. I mean, I think that you did a nice job with that.
Like that, like a Rasputin. That's a good analogy. But I have fun adding that aspect to life, like that mysterious guy, because it is a mystery to me that Napoleon started out very positive and he did a ton of wonderful things for France. Then why was he so mercenary about killing so many people so that he could rule all of Europe? And he made all of his brothers and his relatives like the king of Italy or Naples, or he just put his relatives everywhere. He truly was trying to take over. So
it's sort of that taste of, what do they call it, with like a pit bull? It's like the taste of first blood, and they're ruined from then on because they tasted, and it's almost like he got that taste and then he couldn't let it, it fed off of it. And then his paranoia, and there's a lot of things that I think it's very similar to Hitler. And so I felt it very interesting that, and actually the book that I'm writing right now, Hitler will show up in one of the scenes because, he's I've had to do a lot of research and a lot of firsthand accounts of what he was like in person. How did he talk? Those kind of things. And it's been some pretty, interesting rabbit holes I've fallen down trying to figure out what a scene would look like with him actually interacting in it. Yeah. And so I thought you did a nice job of bringing Napoleon very, very many times. And I thought that was a nice job that you did. And okay, so a couple of things as we kind of wrap things up. So tell me the difference. We haven't really talked about it because we're talking champagne. Let's just kind of pull back a little. What's the difference? What makes champagne champagne? And I know, I know it, but I don't know if all of our viewers know.
I know you know. So these two this is the Veuve Clicquot champagne. And this is sparkling wine that is made, it says here on the label, made in the method champenois. So these two are actually identical except for one thing. And that is that this one's made in France and this one's made in America. So if they're making a champagne in America with this method, the method champenois, then it will taste the same. And champagne is always made with 3 different grapes, and that is the Pinot Noir and the Chardonnay and the Pinot Meunier. So that's like a trademark thing. Whereas something like Prosecco is made entirely differently. And Prosecco is like the Italian sparkling wine, but it's made from different grapes entirely. And it's made with carbonation. It's made entirely differently than this method champenois. So that I'll just tell you what.
Which is why Prosecco is a lot cheaper too to buy, and why champagne is going to be more expensive.
Exactly. That's what makes champagne expensive. Is they basically have to make a fine wine, and then they'll put it through a whole other second fermentation, which is very difficult to do. So it makes it worth it, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So tell me what's next. We talked about it at the beginning. So you're working on your next, the second of 3 books.
Yes. It's about Madame Pommery.
Pommery.
And that is in the 1850s, and it's a different war. It is with Napoleon III, who was really a different man entirely. And all different problems, and she's an older widow, and so a whole different story. And then the third one will be about Madame Bollinger, who has all different stories as well. So
I was hoping Bollinger would be your third one. I'm excited. That
Yeah.
makes me excited. Okay, so tell us how can we get a copy of this book?
It's on Amazon right now. So right now you can get it in an ebook on Amazon. And then the books come out March 1st. So if you have to have a cover, but I am looking for review crew. So I have this. If you want to be on my review crew, you can email me at rebecca@rebecca-rosenberg.com, and you can be on my review crew, and it's a lot of fun. So I welcome
And
everyone.
I'll put the link up and Step Into the Story.
Okay.
So that I'll do that. I'll do a post with that. Okay, so that's good. And you have a website?
Yes, it's rebecca-rosenberg.com.
Okay, perfect. And I so am grateful for you coming here. This has been so much fun. And thank you for writing a fabulous book. I really enjoyed it. As a writer, we all need to be readers as well. And it's always fun to find a new author and find a book that captures me from the very beginning. And it wasn't just the subject matter, although I would have picked it up anyway. I loved your take on it. I loved how deep you went in the story. I so appreciate how you went about writing this book. And thank you so much for coming on here. And next week, I just wanted to let everybody know that next week we're going to be discussing, Barbara Wallace and I are going to be discussing the new book called Shoulder Season. And we actually have Clancy coming in, the author. So we're going to talk with her. And it's a completely different book. It's set in the 1980s, early 1980s at and the heroine actually is a Playboy bunny at one of the resorts in Wisconsin. And it is a very, very exciting, fun book. It's, I didn't know this, but the Playboy Mansion or the Playboy resorts were actually family friendly. And so it's a really fun book. So come join us. There'll be more information on the Step Into the Story about that. And again, Rebecca, thank you for being here. I'm so excited. It's Rebecca-Rosenberg.com, and I will be I wanted to hold off on my review of the book, but I am going to posting my review of the book later this afternoon. Great. So if y'all want to see what I think of it, that will be posted this afternoon. And thank you again, and we will see you next week.
Bye-bye. Thank you.